Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With Hindu-Muslim relations steadily deteriorating and tensions rising, Hasan Suroor has proposed what some would call an interesting and what many would call a controversial solution to the problem. It's part of his new book, which is here. It's called Unmasking Indian Secularism, Why We Need a New Hindu-Muslim Deal. And joining me now to talk about his solution to this critical problem is Hasan Suroor himself. Hasan Suroor, I'm going to actually leave your solution a secret for a moment or two, because I want to start with what I believe is the background to your thinking, because that will help explain to the audience better why you've come to the solution you've reached. You say, and I'm going to quote you, given how heavily the odds are stacked against Muslims and how much they have at stake in resolving the crisis, they must be prepared to make some hard choices. In other words, what you're saying in polite language is Muslims will have to make a few sacrifices for a better relationship with Hindus. Is that right?
Exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah, because they don't have too many options. I mean, we don't have the luxury of many options. I mean, things are going to really get worse. I mean, if you continue like this.
So in other words, the hard choice is the only choice they have.
Yeah, because they don't have many choices anyways. I mean, either you continue to live like you are, I mean, being treated every day and humiliated and have your nose rubbed in the dust, or you decide how to get out of this, and that will require some hard choices.
Now, the second element of the background that I believe conditions your thinking, and again, I'm quoting you, is when you write, the Hindu sense of grievance, real or imaginary, will have to be addressed in the larger interest of India's unity. Again, to use my words rather than yours, what you're saying is that because Hindus are a majority, they must have their way.
Well, I'm not exactly saying that, but I mean, to dismiss all their grievances as totally imaginary, I think is also a bit of doesn't really work, because they are the majority and probably they have a sense of grievance that over the years, probably they have got an impression that the Muslims have been appeased or whatever, because Muslims, don't forget the fact that Muslim leadership has totally failed the community, in the sense the kind of demands that they have raised over 70 years and which have been conceded by the previous governments gave the impression that, Muslims are being appeased, whereas the fact was that only the mullahs were being appeased and the community itself did not get anything. So, and this sense of grievance is among the majorities all over the world. I mean, it's among the whites.
What you're saying is that when a majority has a grievance, that grievance has to be addressed regardless of whether that grievance is real or whether that grievance is imaginary. The fact they have a grievance and they are a majority means it must be addressed.
I'm not saying that. Just as minority grievances should be sort of acknowledged or at least considered, because we don't know, unless we start exploring, we don't know whether they are imaginary or real. The point is this: I'm not a majority, I'm not a Hindu, so I don't know what sense of grievance they have, but I can imagine that maybe there are occasions when they think Muslim mullahs are being like, for instance, the Shah Bano case. I mean, the fact was that it was a egregious case of sort of appeasement of the mullahs, and or the banning of Salman Rushdie's book, which again spawned a whole sort of bans on other demands from the Hindu majority. Yeah.
Quite right. So what you're saying is these grievances have to be addressed.
Yeah, and we will not know whether they're imaginary or not unless we really start looking at them, isn't it? And you can't just dismiss it because it comes from the majority or it is raised by a party which we think is right-wing, and we have quoted it as communal. So it doesn't mean that we just dismiss it out of hand.
You can't dismiss them simply on the grounds you believe they're imaginary. You can't dismiss them on the grounds they come or they're supported or they're propagated by a right-wing party you don't like. They have to be addressed. Is that right?
Yeah, I want to make some point here.
Because we must agree on this background, otherwise we can't go further.
Yeah, I do agree. That their grievances have to be, well, I'm not saying addressed, but they have to be at least considered to see whether they are real or imaginary.
You actually have said they have to be addressed. I'm quoting your sentence. The Hindu sense of grievance, real or imaginary, will have to be addressed in the larger interest of India's unity.
I say addressed, I mean, basically they have to be considered in the sense in order to sort of proceed from there and see what we can do about it, and whether they are real or imaginary. I mean, they may be real. I'm not saying that they're all imaginary. I'm sure that they will be. Yeah.
Let's then agree that the two backgrounds on which You have based your solution, and we still haven't revealed to the audience what your solution is. But the two backgrounds on which you've based your solution are A, Muslims have to make hard choices, which you accepted meant they have to make sacrifices. And the second is that Hindu grievances, whether they're real or imaginary, have to be addressed. Now,
I'll say, I'll improve upon it and say considered, basically. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. Now,
all right,
on the basis of those two backgrounds, let's reveal to the audience your solution. You believe that India should be a Hindu country, just as Britain is a Christian country where the Queen is the defender of the faith. But, and the but is very important, like Britain, minorities in India must be treated equally, secularly, and also democratically. And I'm going to once again quote from you. You write, a state can have an officially recognized religion. In India's case, it will be Hinduism, and yet remain secular in practice by treating all citizens as equals and making sure that their religious and civil rights are protected by law, as in many Western liberal democracies, including Britain, where the state is Christian, but government practices are secular. Why do you believe this solution is the right and best one for India?
Because, I mean, the whole majoritarian trend is now, I mean, that is a Hindu sense of grievance, in a sense that we are a majority, and still, you know, in the name of secularism, we are not being sort of given the importance that we deserve. And I think if they are allowed to have this sense that, okay, India is a Hindu state, part of that grievance will probably disappear, you know. I mean, of course, it's a great leap of faith. I mean, it depends. I mean, the political parties, whether they, even after accepting that, they will continue to behave the way they do. But the point is, it's a leap of faith. And because we don't have too many options, I think you got to take this leap of faith and see what happens. Because whilst I'm not saying that I'm just saying that we recognize the Hinduism as the religion of India, official religion of India. But I'm not saying that Hinduism should be in the public sphere. The public sphere should remain secular as it is in Britain. I mean, in Britain, for instance, there are bishops who sit in the House of Lords. They are the only religious representatives. Or the House of Commons begins its session with a prayer. But it doesn't mean that outside that, you know.
Absolutely. But what you're saying is that India should accept that Hinduism is the official religion of the state.
Yeah.
In other words, India will stop being officially, constitutionally a secular country. It will become officially, constitutionally a Hindu country. But, then again, the but is the critical part. The treatment of minorities must be secular, it must be equal, it must be democratic, just as it is in Britain.
Yeah, there should be a very strong equalities law which should be enforced. But again, as I said, it's a leap of faith, because one doesn't know, I mean, whether it will be done or not done. Britain does it, whether India will be able to do it or will have the political will to do it, that's the point.
You've taken the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
It's a leap of faith if after India is made a Hindu state, its minorities will be treated democratically, secularly, and equally. That is the leap of faith I want to explore with you. First of all,
before you go ahead, I'm saying this leap of faith, even if it doesn't work, the fact is that today, for all practical purposes, India has become effectively a Hindu state, in the sense of minorities and Muslims especially are treated as second-class citizens. They have, I mean, there's no sense of security, nothing. So it can't get worse than this, can it?
In other words, you're also converting the de facto to the de jure.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay.
The de facto we already have. So let them have it.
But
right
there
now
is,
that right now
course,
they're having it too, isn't it? I mean, the point is right now they're eating the cake and having it too, saying that we are a secular state and pretending to be a secular state, but yet in everyday life, here basically it's a Hindu state.
But let me now come to why that leap of faith may not work in India. There are two particular conditions which together ensure that Britain is a Christian country where the Queen is officially entitled as defender of the faith, and yet every non-Christian in Britain, be he a Jew, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Parsi, or whatever, is treated equally in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of the government. And it's those two conditions that may not apply in India. Firstly, in Britain, people do not seek their identity through their religion. Most people in Britain are not very religious. Church attendance is not just low, but it's steadily falling year after year. Religion doesn't matter to people in their daily lives. Exactly the opposite is true in India. In India, people identify themselves through their religion. So will this work in India?
Well, the point is that, I mean, they made the church attendance may be falling. Yes, I mean, this is basically a very recent phenomenon. The point is that they keep talking about Christian values. In fact, even in Britain, they keep telling others, the immigrants and so on, that Christian values, they must practice Christian values, which are the liberal values and the best values. So, yeah, it's a deeply, so that proves my point.
Forgive me, Hasan. Forgive me. The days of television preaching about Christian values goes back to the 70s, when a lady called Mary, whose surname I now forget, used to do it regularly from a sort of pulpit that she'd given herself. Today, neither the British media nor the British public actually preach about Christian values. And if they use the term Christian values, they're actually talking about moral values. They're talking about moral values, the term has become synonymous. In India, the identification with religion is critical to the existence of every Indian. That's not
every British Prime Minister, from David Cameron to Boris Johnson to Margaret to the other one, Theresa May, everybody, every time they opened their mouth, including Tony Blair, they always talked about Christian values and said, if you're living in Britain, you have to follow these values. They don't accept Muslims, I mean, the Islamic values and so on and so forth, which they associate with, being anti-women and so on and so forth. So the point is this, that Christian values are constantly being invoked, not by evangelists, but by prime ministers and by political leaders, not in the sense of imposing upon them,
but raising them. But what you're forgetting is when they talk of Christian values, the term is actually synonymous with moral. It's moral values that they mean, even if they use the term Christian values. They're not actually advocating Christianity.
I agree, but
I'm glad you agree.
In a way, they're equating Christianity with a slightly higher moral values than, other religions.
Let's come to the second problem, which would occur in India. It doesn't occur in Britain, which is why the leap of faith you're talking about may not actually work in India. In India, politicians seek to divide people on the basis of their religion. We've seen that repeatedly over the last 8 years. In Britain, that hasn't happened since the Good Friday Agreement of 1997. And even then, prior to 1997, it was really limited only to Northern Ireland. In Britain, politicians do not seek votes on the basis of dividing people in terms of their religion. And that is another big difference in India.
But look, I'm not saying that you replicate Britain in India. I mean, the point nothing, no two models, one model cannot be imposed, completely replicated. What I'm saying that these are the models which we can explore and see what comes out of it. I mean, we can have our own local version of it, in the sense that we adapt it according to our own this thing. And my basic point, I'm not bothered about caste and so on. I'm bothered about the Hindu-Muslim relations, because, well, I am a Muslim, and as a Muslim, I feel we have to get it out of this mess.
But Hasan,
civil war among the Hindus. I don't mind really
I'm not saying that you're saying we should replicate Britain. Obviously, we can't. We're not British. But you're saying that the British model is one that we could use. And the British model is that you are an officially, constitutionally declared Christian country, but the government's practices are secular. I'm saying that may not work. If India declares itself officially Hindu, it's quite possible that the practices of the government may not be secular. That distinction that occurs in Britain may not occur in India. That's the point I'm making.
But what I'm trying to say is that what I've said in the book is that has to be the basis of any new deal. And that is the crux of the deal, that if we allow you to have, we say, okay, you have the Hindu state, but in return, you'll ensure that any other people, minorities, are treated as equal citizens. I mean, you treat them as citizens, not as Muslims or as anything else, but you treat them as citizens. That has to be the basis of any new deal. That's the whole crux of it.
In other words, that is the condition on which Muslims agree to India becoming a Hindu state.
Yeah.
That is the condition on which Muslims agree to India becoming a Hindu state.
But I suppose that is exactly. And I said in so many words that has to be the basis. But the point is, we are not at a point where we are actually sitting down and, fixing it. At the point we are only starting a debate on it. What is the best way to, the whole idea of this book is to
Absolutely.
want to get out of the situation. Yeah.
Well, I'm well aware we're only starting a debate. I'm well aware of that.
Yeah.
And as I said in the introduction, many will find your idea interesting, but probably many more will find it controversial. However,
let me tell you, Karan, one thing. I was in fact very afraid that the Muslim reaction to this book might be very bad and maybe but most Muslims have reacted very favorably to this idea because they believe that they are already living in a Hindu state and it cannot get worse than this.
Okay, I accept that. Now, in your book,
it's like somebody wanting a toy. You give the toy to that person. Whether the child stops crying or not, that's a different thing. But you at least offer the child the toy that they're wanting.
Okay. Now, in your book, you say there are several successful models in South Asia and the Muslim world, where countries are religious by constitution but secular in practice. What are the sort of countries you have in mind?
Well, there's Malaysia, there's also Bangladesh. Of course, people may have their differences, people may think, but they are they're called Islamic republics, but actually the practices are quite secular. In Malaysia, for instance, the ban on alcohol and all that doesn't apply to non-Muslims.
And I suppose you could cite Indonesia, where Bali, which is a province of Indonesia, is entirely Hindu, and there are no prohibitions on Hindu worship in Bali whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me, let's broaden our discussion.
Yeah.
Where do you stand, for instance, on the present campaigns in Kashi, Mathura, as well as several other places to demolish mosques which were allegedly constructed on previous Hindu sites, which of course is a defiance of the 1991 Places of Worship Act? Where do you stand on that issue?
See, to begin with, I'm against, like any sensible person will be, the so-called settling of historical scores. So anyway, on that basis, it's all wrong. But as far as Muslims are concerned, I think they had a weaker case they have a weaker case in Mathura and Varanasi. In fact, they had a stronger case in Ayodhya because there was no evidence that this place exactly the spot where Ram was born, and therefore masjid has to be demolished to build a temple. Whereas in Varanasi and Mathura both, there are at least evidence that these were temples and that you can even see them. And so I think the case is weaker here than it was in Ayodhya. And 1991 law said that.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Are you also therefore saying if the case is weaker, you personally, I'm talking about you personally, would have no problem if the site of either the Gyanvapi Mosque or the Eidgah in Mathura were to be handed over to Hindus? Would you personally have no problem?
I didn't even have any objection even to the Babri Masjid, because I thought it's not worth it. There are so many masjids you can go and have your namaz anywhere. It's not worth picking a fight on this. Yeah, absolutely.
What about something else? You cited the example of Britain, and with that in mind in the background, where do you stand on the Muslim personal law universal civil code issue?
Well, I think it does need a lot of reforms. Originally, I was very gung-ho about the uniform civil code, but as I have sort of evolved and read it, I think what it needs is, see, every community, this is not very widely known, that every community in India have their own personal laws. And basically, it has been hanging like a sort of dangling like a Damocles sword over Muslims, that as though they are the only ones who have it. Tomorrow, if the time has come to probably call the bluff and say, look, okay, come and have a uniform civil code. No community is going to give it their own personal laws for a uniform civil code, whether it's Hindus or Christians or whoever. They all have their own, continue to have their own personal laws. And I don't think this identity business really works, that you have one size fits, solution imposed on all communities. You reform it, you fit it into the secular thing, yes, but you can't totally demolish it, because there are communities who live according to their own sort of way of life.
So you're making a critical point. You are in favor, if I've understood your answer correctly, of a uniform civil code, but it can't be a one size fit all. It has to have accommodation for the varieties and the richness and the differences of faiths.
And I believe that this whole issue is being used again just to target the Muslims. giving the impression over the years it's the only Muslims who don't want a uniform civil code where everybody else wants, and they are standing in the way. That's not true. It's time to call the bluff. Let's have a uniform civil code, and then you'll see how many communities, including the Hindus, come and join your campaign.
You're absolutely right. If you're going to do away with Muslim personal law, you must also do away with what is called, in tax terms, the status of HUF, Hindu undivided family. All of that would have to go. But what you're saying is you need a proper universal civil code that has allowances within it for the idiosyncrasies, if I can use that, or the exceptionalities of different religions. But you're also saying that separate personal laws for each faith should no longer exist. You need a broad, accommodating.
In a secular society, you do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Finally, because we're coming to the end of this interview, I also have read an article that you wrote for the Telegraph roughly 2.5 months ago on the 16th of March. And there, when I read that article, I get the feeling that you're thinking the solution that we've discussed in some detail earlier on is driven by a sense of desperation that arises out of two different senses. And I want to put each of those to you one by one. First, you write, and I'm quoting you, "We must stop dreaming about a secular utopia and instead try and make the best of a bad situation. Politically isolated and facing an uncertain future, Muslims have few options. The question is whether they want to prolong the agony or try and find a dignified way out of it." In other words, you're driven by a sense of desperation to find this solution that you've just discussed.
Well, I said that at the very outset that this is driven by. I'm as a desperate Muslim. This is because they have no other options. I mean, what do? We cannot go migrate to another country. Muslims are India's. India is their country. They cannot go anywhere. When they say you go to Pakistan, Pakistan is not an Indian Muslims country. And so if you want to live in this country, and we want to live with a certain amount of dignity, not being humiliated every day, then we have to find some way of getting out of this mess, isn't it? The second is an agony. As a Muslim, is an agony. I come here and leave only occasionally. But even when I'm here for 6 months or 3 months, I find every day, my stress levels go up because of the kind of debates that are on the television, what I read, the statements, and you feel like, treated like shit, basically.
The second sense of desperation arises out of your acceptance that there is no savior on the horizon. You write, and I'm quoting again, "There's no Godot coming to our rescue. Muslims are on their own and time is running out."
Yeah, and the point, instead of people coming and rescuing us, we are getting more and more isolated. In fact, our own allies, the Congress, the so-called secular parties, they're all abandoning us in the sense that they seem to be sort of now embarrassed being seen in the company of Muslims. They will not even, whether it were riots in Delhi or wherever, these people like, all these political leaders, they don't even want to go and comfort the victims or whatever, for fear of being, portrayed as anti-Hindu and, appeasing Muslims or pro-Muslims, and they might lose Hindu votes. So, they're actually distancing themselves. Even our own allies have started distancing themselves from us, and we're getting totally isolated. So we are just on our own, basically.
I understand that. My last question, what do you say to people? And many of them will be Muslims, many will be Hindus. Yeah. But I suspect, if I'm not mistaken, that a very large number of people will say Hasan Suroor has buckled under the pressure of Hindutva. What do you say to them?
Yeah, they let them say that. I'm not. I don't really, over the years I haven't bothered what people say. The fact is that I'm not even a practicing Muslim. The fact is that just because I have a name, I am called a Muslim, and therefore tomorrow I can be attacked because my name is Hasan Suroor. So I'll be treated as another Muslim, whatever. The point is that let them say that. I've been accused of that over the years, and similarly, if I write something pro-Muslim, then I'm accused of Muslim fundamentalists. That's all right. I have no problems with that. My only problem is that Muslims must get out of this situation, and it's time to come and sort of take a hard look and take the poison pill, as if it comes to that.
Hasan Suroor, thank you very much for agreeing to talk about your views, and thank you very much for explaining them and answering all my questions. Take care.
Thank you, Karan, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.